Good morning and happy Saturday, all. Welcome to Drink Up. We are live raw and real with my co-host, as always, Sam Anderson and Brian Sudant joining us today. Sudant. Shit.
Sudan.
Don.
We, we practiced it. He's like, it's Sue Don. Sue and Don, Sudan. And he was working with me last night, and I was like, okay, we know we're going to mess it up, but hey, welcome everybody to Drink Up.
He said, and I said it right, and then my brain went, shit, was it Dan or Don? Damn it. I know it was a name. Damn it.
The appropriate, if I was to give my ancestors props, it's Sudan, right? It's French. But it's a name that is good for search engine optimization. It's good for uniqueness. But I learned a long time ago not to get offended by mispronunciations.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me some grace. Welcome. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so go ahead, Al.
Go ahead. So I promised I would hold my questions until we are actually on the show, but before I get, up to speed and Sam gets rolling, maybe give a little just intro on yourself, who you are, where you live, what you do, all the cookie jars you got hands in.
Sure. Well, I live in Boston, Massachusetts. Been in the adult beverage industry for probably 80% of my career since finishing college. Started like a lot of people in this industry in the sales role. And I started at Gallo. I got opportunity to join the Gallo selling organization right out of college.
Well, then you're a good person because that's where I started too.
It's a great network of people. It's about as strong of a opportunity as you can find if you're a young person to enter the world of sales, CPG, food and beverage, and obviously the industry. Really enjoyed it. Was there just under 10 years before I actually left the industry for 5 years. Worked in medical devices for a little bit. Went back to graduate school here in Boston at Boston University, where I studied strategy and I studied data analysis, which is, two things that I feel like we can never get enough of in life. Talking about strategy, and the world only has more data sloshing around today than ever before. Then came back to the industry, like I said, after that 5-year hiatus on the buying side. And I got a chance to go inside Giant Eagle and sit on the alcohol team as a category manager for wine and low proof spirits. Was a tremendous learning experience, and I know we're going to talk about it today. Learned a lot about the industry from a very unique, vantage point. Came back to the manufacturer side about 10 years ago at Boston Beer, where I led a number of teams based on data analysis, business operations, cross-functional planning, transformation projects, just a kind of a litany of different jobs that were at the headquarter level, what I call a lot of connective tissue work, bringing different functions together. Since then, I've worked at a startup, Down East Cider, running the brand team there. And then for the last year or so, been doing a lot of different consulting projects that have kind of come to me in very different and unique ways.
Did he capture your interest on startup or the company?
Well, no, I literally, there's a bar a mile from my house, so I walk there. I had a Down East Cider on my way home last night. It's just funny that you mentioned them.
Yeah, what flavor did you have?
The original, man. That's the
original.
only cider they have on tap, and I'm so glad it's not, no knock to those who like it or those who make it. I love it, like Magners, Strongbow, Bulmers, those are my top choices, but if you don't, because those are a little harder to find, if you don't have those, I like it down east. I'll also do local stuff. I'll do number 12 from here in Minnesota. RIP, they're closing down. But I like just an unflavored, just a straight apple. I don't need peach. I don't need strawberry. Just a standard apple cider.
Man, we need to go after some sponsorships eventually, Adam. So that's on your things to do. Go get us some sponsorships.
It's interesting. We can talk. I mean, cider is a resilient little segment of the industry that is very unique.
Yeah.
But small companies, large companies, everyone's trying to do the same thing, which is bring consistent products to market that meet the consumer's needs, that distributors can get excited about, retailers can get excited about. And how do you keep the main thing, but also have other seasonal releases or for line extensions, to grow the brand, increase occasions, etc. And then the other thing I've been doing, just as I kind of wrap up my bio here, I've been teaching classes at the University of Massachusetts at the business school, the Manning School of Business on the Lowell campus. Professor, yes, the professor, or as one of my students calls me, Professor S. They know better than to just try to pronounce the name. But it's interesting, I think a lot of times people, we get our undergraduate degrees, or maybe we get some master's degrees or something like that, and we stop, right? Going back and teaching for me has been, I'm taking the course too,
Yeah.
I'm taking the course along with with the students. And I taught a class in change management, taught a class in sales, and I'm teaching a class right now on strategy. And what I love about it is when you have to explain things to people early in their careers or people who haven't even begun their careers, it forces you, we have all this experience, just how do you just get back to basics? And the sales class was particularly interesting as I, benchmarked my experience working with sales organizations over the years. And there's a lot of sales organizations. Every sales organization needs improvement in different ways. But it's been a great ride. I think the kind of neat, cool thing for me the last year and change doing consulting is meeting new people, seeing, getting a different look at the dynamic aspects of the industry. And with LinkedIn and with Zoom calls and networking, it is really quick to expand your network more than ever.
Well, yeah. First of all, you're always welcome to come on Drink Up. So we're open here. We're raw and real, as you know. Let's get into, you reached out to me a few weeks ago. You said, hey, man, I was a buyer and I would love to talk about, what it takes, I guess, for a buyer to consider you as a brand, right? And we've been talking a lot about, how you make the brand, use consultants like Adam, myself, to bring the brand to market. But if you can't get past you, the gatekeeper, none of that stuff matters. So I guess, why don't we break it down a little bit from your point of view? When a brand shows up at your door, well, first of all, how does a brand get an appointment with a buyer, right? I mean, how do you even get considered, right? Because that seems to be a mystery to a lot of people.
Yeah, it is a mystery. And I think we can use this time here to demystify things a little bit. One of the things that I found very valuable when I was in the role was the role of the distributors. I use the distributors as more than just a logistics provider of someone to, warehouse product and deliver it into my stores. And I actually help them because the way I thought about this was you have your big, large commercial companies. They do a great job. They have some of the best brands in the business, very consistent quality. But you have to go out and find that long tail. Well, how do you do it? Well, most buyers don't have time to go and research all of that. So I actually leaned on my distributor network to say, hey, who do you actually have in your book, or who do you have that might be coming online that could be helpful? And then we had this is kind of the way the process works a lot. We had a person who kind of managed our calendars, and they would look at the different, requests and be, would you want to meet with this person? Yes or no, and what would that look like? I think one of the things that I always looked for was what was the company representing? What were their brands? And then did that align with our overall business objectives? When I was in the wine role, we were very focused on premium plus. So at the time, $12 and above, $15 and above. And if there was a winery that played in that space, we were probably more apt to talk to them rather than a value producer.
So I had to you had a gatekeeper yourself to get to you. Actually, two gatekeepers. You had the distributor, and then you had the appointment setter. So yeah. I can't call you directly as a buyer, or has that changed?
No, you can call directly as a buyer. I think there's a lot of different paths in, and I think today there's, obviously just, you can get an email address, but can you call the buyer? You might be able to approach them on LinkedIn. I would also not, you could send direct mail to the offices, but I think any way to get in front of the buyer, there's a lot of paths.
I like the LinkedIn strategy because I actually have connections with a lot of buyers out there, but I notice that they don't respond much, but they're active. In other words, I think they're looking, but they're not communicating, but they're definitely out there.
Yeah, I think we all know the story of, you'll talk to someone and say, hey, I loved your LinkedIn stuff. And I'm like, really? I didn't even know you saw it. You never hit the like button. You never engaged with me on it. So I do think that if I was in a buying role still, I would absolutely be looking at LinkedIn for different types of updates or business to business updates.
Interesting.
I think you need to know when the buyers are going to open up their consideration window, and what does that look like. But your distributors are always a huge, portion of that. But it's
in our business, we can't even get the distributor to pick up the phone and take our brands oftentimes. I just heard yesterday that, and sorry, Southern, because I think you do great work. Up in New York, one of our guys was telling us that, Southern is, releasing a lot of their long tail suppliers, right? And he's like, it's getting really competitive because the smaller wholesalers are picking up those long tail suppliers and are kind of moving down the line. versus moving up the line, right? But obviously the breakthroughs and the Southern Glazed Wine and Spirits are focused on their large guys.
Well, I think that's part of the value proposition of your organization that you're building is you're going to simplify the experience for a distributor. You get the best of both worlds. You get access to these gems in the marketplace, but you don't have to have a number of different meetings. You can meet with one person who is like a mini distributor, if you will. Persistence and grit and hustle and is always going to pay off. And yeah, just getting the meeting can be challenging for sure.
All right, so let's so, and I know Adam's a thinker here, so I'm gonna ask one more question, Adam, because I know you have a lot to ask.
You're
But
fine.
let's say that I get past the distributor, I get past your calendar gatekeeper, or I connect you to you on LinkedIn, or somehow I get a meeting with you. So I'm getting ready to go to the meeting. What do I prepare for? What do I need to bring with me?
I would first off get into stores, and I would bring photos of stores you went and recently saw, and put that in your presentation sooner rather than later. And say, hey, in preparation for today's calls, I went to these 3 stores. Here's what I saw. Buyers are never in stores as much as they want to be. And anytime they can get intel about store performance, the better. I think it's funny sometimes people will fly into the headquarters and go into a buyer's office and it's like, you did all this work, but you didn't take the hour to go to a store or 2. So that's one thing I would do from a preparation standpoint.
That's new information, Adam. Have you heard that before? Take pictures of stores?
Not that specifically. I've known people to, like, for example, I'll pick on the Empire at Walmart. I've known people when they're traveling to Bentonville to intentionally, go in a day or so early, do some reconnaissance of their own just so they can speak to things. But I haven't heard anyone actually call it out or anyone say that they've gone as far as to take photos and include it as part of their presentation.
Yeah. I think that you want to show that you're trying to understand what the retailer's trying to achieve. So if you were calling on me at Giant Eagle, 8 years ago, and you went to our stores, you would have noticed we were making a huge emphasis on premium plus wines. We were putting wine stations in. We were putting wine stewards in the aisle. We were building a store within a store, wooden floors, drop down lighting, and really trying to offer a premium shopping experience to the consumer. Now, we weren't doing that to sell Franzia. No offense to the wine group. They by the way, they were one of my favorite suppliers when they called on me. But we were doing that to sell $12 and above wines. So, okay, well, help me do that. Help me achieve my business outcome. What am I trying to do? Now, this was against the backdrop that the leadership at Giant Eagle was all in on wine. They said, like, this is a strategic growth category for us. So we're going to give you a lot, Brian, to work with, but we're going to expect a lot in terms of market share growth. And how are you going to achieve that? Well, you look at the industry and you figure out where they are growing. So that's one thing I would think about is what is the retailer's outcome. If your product is in a growth segment, that's a good thing. You want to talk about the fact that you're playing in the part of the store that is growing. It's a naturally growing area. Rising tide raises all ships. Retailers will be more.
Like you said, growth segments. Like, okay, are you talking about like I'm from a $15 to $20 bottle of wine? That segment's growing at 20% versus 15 and below is actually declining.
Bingo, 100%. I use the mutual fund analogy. Right? That a retailer's wine set or beer set or shelf set, you're like a mutual fund owner. And all those different brands are like different stocks. And what you're hoping is that you have the right mix across the whole category that you're going to move forward, right? And you're going to drive. Now, some of these brands are going to rock. Some of your stocks are going to do really well. Some of the stocks are going to underperform. But you want to have that breadth of selection.
Please don't talk about stocks this morning, but okay.
I know. You got it, but think of it, right? If you're
it's dissipating.
I watch Costco's stock. It's just one of the stocks I watch. They've been pretty well the last 2 days, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny. My friend Eric Martindale, I don't know, Adam, if you met him, you'll meet him eventually, but he talked about Costco, and Costco's absolutely, they're going to take price discounts, by the way, and we'll get back on to you, but they're taking price discounts. They're actually going to reduce their prices. So is Walmart. So, and from a buying perspective, so they obviously see something in a white space there to do something. So back.
I think what they're sensing is they're going to get a lot of increased foot traffic over the next 30 to 60 days, just because of the news chatter.
Yeah.
And then they really want to surprise and delight people when they come into their stores. You're like, wow, all right, this is good, and I'm going to come back. They're going to build some memory structure around the value that they offer. But no, I would go back. Like if we're talking about beer today, Beer volumes are not growing, but non-alcoholic is growing, and it's opening up its pie. Now it's at 1 or 2%. There's a lot of discussion. Maybe gets to 4% of beer, 8% of beer. Does it crest over 10% by the end of this decade? Nobody knows. But if I'm the retailer right now, I'm riding that wave because I know there's more people going to that section, experimenting with that section. But the most important thing I would be doing right now, if I was a retail buyer with non-alcoholic beverages, is I would be tasting the product before I put it on the shelf. Because you have people that have never drank this segment before, and when they go to drink it, you want to make sure it tastes good.
So you should bring your product so you should go to do a store survey. You should talk about, how your category is winning in that hot category, and you should taste them.
Yeah, absolutely. We tasted every item that we put on the shelf at Giant Eagle. It was it turned into a little bit of trust but verify approach because we knew the top 10 wineries were generally going to have satisfactory or above average juice because of their sourcing capabilities, manufacturing capabilities, quality control capabilities. But we always tasted everything. But yes, I would absolutely bring more than one bottle. There's usually more than one person on the buying team. And if it's wine, bring 2 or 3 because sometimes one of them's corked.
Hey, I want to interrupt. A couple people just said hello. Good morning. Zach Holtz, I think you might know Zach.
Oh yeah, I know Zach.
Giving you a shout out. Kelly Lease, one of my friends, Son Aka, and then Alicia. Obviously, she always sits back and a conversation. But they just wanted to say hello to you this morning, Brian.
I know Zach from our Boston beer days, and great marketer, really great experience, great keen eye for end-to-end execution, and how do you bring everything alive in store.
So he was prepared when he called on the buyer. He was prepared.
Yeah, I think So I think part of that is, what I would always tell people when you come in to see me for a meeting, it was three things. One is, what are you doing or what are you proposing?
Yeah.
Quite often it was a new item distribution.
Yeah.
Or a display program or something like that, right?
Right.
Why are you doing it? Right? Why do you think, what are you seeing in the market? It could be the segment is growing. It could be that there's a new way of making the product. There could be a new packaging design or something like that. And then what are you going to do to make it work? Now, I'm going to flip this last part here. What are you going to do to make it work? People would come in and say, I got these Instagram followers. We're putting a billboard up. We have a YouTube pre-roll going on. And I'm like, great. But I would actually end with that. I would start with, what are you going to do locally? It's like, well, we're really tight with our wholesaler. We have a target to get to this level of distribution in this amount of time. I have money available to support a tasting program for your area. I'm educating the distributor personnel. I might be bringing a coupon, any other lever that you can pull. Get micro first down to the actual store shopping experience, and then pull back to the big macro demand levers that you're pulling. That's going to be more important and that's going to show the retailer that you're worried about the retailer first. Because, I remember somebody telling me they're putting a billboard on the side of the highway in Cleveland, and I was like, "That's great," but everyone that's shopping at my competitors is going to see that too. But I got these wine stations in 25 of my stores that we use to engage the drinker. How are you going to go and support that?
So that's a differentiator then. When I go and I'm talking to you, I'm like, look, within your stores, I'm going to do 50 tastings over the course of the year, very targeted for 3 hours, sitting inside your store. Is that something that would get you to make a decision to put me on the shelf? Because I'm focused against the pull out of your store.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the shelf, photos of the store is interesting. It's also, hey, here's why I would recommend putting it on the shelf and use the shelf of the retailer, right? Or hey, here's a great display and area that I would love to be a part of. Because I think one of the things that I learned in retail was everyone's like, well, what does the buyer do with their time when they're not engaging with the trade? Like, what are you actually doing? And you're working on ad schedules and you're working on assortment, but you're also dealing with your internal operations team. And wine is a clunky beast of a segment. You got to remember, the soda aisle gets visited daily by a couple of vendors, and they keep that thing looking good. So does the bread aisle. The produce aisle, produce section, they have an army of people on that work directly for the store. Same with seafood, same with meat. But the alcohol section can get kind of clunky from time to time. It's also a high inventory, from a cost standpoint. There's usually COD for the store as well. So I think that it's also what can you do to ensure good internal operation execution, and that's where your distributor is important. Now I have the luxury when I was at Giant Eagle, we were in basically greater Cleveland and a little bit of Columbus. So our distributor network was kind of small for the calls we were having. But I always tried to have the distributor with me. And that was for two reasons. One was I like the distributor to know what was going on with our suppliers. And then two, it reduced the confusion between the distributor and the supplier
So
about
you
what was
just store
actually said in
visits.
the
You
meeting.
just store visits.
Yeah, no, but when people would come and call on me, they would bring their distributor. So I'd have a
Okay.
rep I'd have a rep from the a wine company and my key contact from Heidelberg there with me, and it was great.
So here's a real life situation. So I get that because I was a category captain inside American Stores. So think of me as like a junior buyer. I wasn't what you did, but I actually supported the buyers. And I would go at every call that came in, but the gatekeeper was a distributor. So they would bring, like they would book the entire day, right, in American Stores. And then every half hour there'd be a new supplier coming in to talk to the buyer, and then after the supplier left, at the end of the day they'd kind of recap who kind of made the cut and who didn't make the cut, and next steps in terms of when they were going through assortment and making their decisions.
Yeah, no, that's it's a great
We
service
lost
that the distributor can provide too,
Yeah.
especially when you are going to do a big bang program where all of a sudden inventory needs change very quickly, timing of
Yeah.
ads are critically important. So there's a whole operational component. Now, once a buyer makes a decision, there's a blowback all the way back to the winery in California bottling things, right? Or the distillery or the brewery somewhere, right? They have to make things. It's like, good news, you sold the program. Now the fun starts, right? You have to execute it from an operational standpoint. So the distributors, I think, are important there. And I think, you know, I probably spent more time in aggregate with my distributor contacts than I did with some of the largest suppliers that called on me.
Interesting. So Adam, you've been thinking here. It's time for you to fire off some questions. You've been doing. He does research too. He has like 5 monitors up, and so he's done deep using DeepSeek on everything about you.
You know, it's funny, Sam. Usually you're right, and this is no knock to any of our other guests, but this one's a little kid in a candy story for me because, right, as the you know, again, I mentioned this to Brian before we got on, the meat and potatoes ops guy. Like, so much of the conversations I have once we move beyond, you know, okay, again, the stuff that I do and I enjoy doing, I don't mean to roll my eyes at it, but the vendor onboarding or the very foundational stuff, right? Setting up your co-packer, understanding your COGS, that kind of thing. Once we move beyond that, inevitably the conversation becomes, well, okay, you know, how do I pitch this successfully to a distributor? How do I pitch this successfully to a retailer, right? And again, not the guy that has lived that for any substantial amount of time, but I have several friends, Sam being one of them, Brian, you being a new one, who have told me, right? Essentially, tell a good story, right? Tell a good story, tell a detailed story, show them you give a shit, right? So on and so forth. And so I think for me, it's, you know, I sit here listening to you guys talk, and it's A, it validates what I think I know, right? B, it just makes me wish that, you know, all the brands I'm working with, because they're all hyper small and they're all asking the exact same question, we're sitting here with us, or we're taking your class, right? Because it's the amount of, I think people try to to your point with the billboard, right? It's a perfect example. I've got one brand that's like, yeah, we're looking at getting into Coachella. Why? For what? Cool. Instagram posts are awesome. Don't get me wrong. Cool. But like, to what end? Right? Like, what good is that actually going to do you from a day in, day out sales, retailer relationship, distribution, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm just here, you know, in loving that I can soak this all in because, like I said, it tracks with what I thought I knew, and it only adds to it. I think if there's a question at the end of any of that, it's, for selfishly, a lot of the brands I work with are, I'll use the polite term, pre-revenue.
Yeah, we've gotten into that.
They're broke. I love them dearly. If you're listening, you're out there, I love working with you guys, and you pay your bills on time. But in the grand scheme of things, I think we can all agree you're broke, right? So I love you. But the question then is, for those folks, obviously they don't have the funds, they don't have the time capacity, the bandwidth, the labor, whatever, to do everything. Meaning the in-store samplings, meaning to fly out ahead of time and be around at all the stores, right? So if I can ask the difficult question of, for a brand, Brian, if you're educating someone or you're consulting and they're that size, they're very green, there's one thing, like, hey, do this one thing to help have a fruitful conversation with someone like yourself, what would it be?
Stay probably more focused geographically than you want to early on.
One.
Right.
Love
And
it.
like, So like go win in Atlanta before you worry about Charlotte, right? Go win, you know, go and then that way you can do all you can kind of do everything right, and then you get your proof of concept. It's like somebody told me once, like food and beverage. It's a little bit like politics. It's all local. It's what do you have available? Like think about your shopping trip. I don't make any decisions buying something. I live in Boston. I don't care what's going on in Rochester or Detroit. No offense, or Pittsburgh, right? I'm going to walk into my store or my local restaurant, probably within a 5 mile radius of where I live, and I can only buy what I can buy, right? I can't buy what I can't buy. I'm only going to buy what's in that store. So I would think about how do you win locally and do everything the right way before you think about scaling.
Yeah, we always say go an inch wide and a mile deep is
Yep.
a big
Yep.
thing. And when we
Yep.
talk to founders, we're like, okay, and we have this tequila brand, and they're really focused in Sacramento, and it's like a $150 to $200 bottle of wine, and focused in Sacramento. We have another one that's in Houston, and that's like can probably be a $250 bottle of wine. But like, okay, let's just build out Houston. Houston's like freaking 5 states. I mean, it's huge. That's a pretty big area to focus in. So I love hearing that.
Yeah, and I think it's for young brands. Like, what's interesting is like I've talked to some brands lately, and everyone's thinking about this like a SaaS startup. Like they want to just scale and sell, right? They want an exit in 24 months, and I'm like, that's pretty small here, right? This is the marginal cost.
Olipop did it. I just did an article on
high.
Olipop. They did it in 5 years, which is pretty darn amazing, actually.
Yeah, but 5 years though, think about that, right? Like that takes a long time, but they operate think about all the other brands that couldn't punch through, right? On that.
95% of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I would say, try to stay focused geographically, build your proof of concept, because if somebody came to me and said, all right, we're here in Cleveland, Ohio, and here's what we achieved in Baltimore, I'd be like, huh, interesting, right? Or here's what we achieved in Denver. It's like, okay, but rather than coming in and being kind of like half, organized around it, I think that's important as well. I think I'd be curious. A question for you guys as you deal with these large, national distributors, are they thinking about things that way? Where, all right, we have our network around the country, but we have our branch or our local operation in, say, Florida, and we're going to percolate a couple things down here and get ready to springboard them out to other
I think you
areas
bring
of
a
the country.
very interesting question. I don't think they were thinking that way until now, meaning, and I'm sorry, RNDC, and I'm not, this is just an opinion. No one's told me this, RNDC, but I suspect they went down a path where they were doing all this national decision making and trying to centralize everything. I believe they're going to decentralize now their decision making. Now, RNDC want to call a spade, that's fine, but I believe that our business being the bev alc business, you got to get back to locality. I mean, I learned that as a category captain in American Stores when I was working with Mitch Odo, and God bless him, Rep Mitch and Dave Walsh. I mean, they always told me, man, you got to think global but act local, and this is a local business.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, you're spurring. There was one of my more memorable calls at Giant Eagle. It was a representative from an Italian winery who came in, and he was from Italy. And he didn't have, it was like his English wasn't very good, but what he said was, America is more like Europe than you think. You're one country, but you're actually very fractured in your cultural components, your food and beverage trends. And he kind of burned me down. He's like, you got the Southeast is like this, the Pacific Northwest is like this. And he was like, this is how I view America from the outside. I kind of view it like Europe. And I think that if you were to go into Europe, right, would you say, all right, we're going to go France, Italy, Europe, Germany, Austria, year one? No, you're like, I'm going to have a plan for England.
I
For
absolutely love that comparison.
And then you get something that, springboards across everything.
Yeah.
But it would, if I was a large national wholesaler network right now, I would have somebody in charge of saying, all right, what are my regional bets? And I'm going to have a bench or my minor league team, whatever you want to term it. And I want to have these, 20 brands that we believe in, that we are going to try to win locally, overinvest locally, because we think it could springboard. It's like a venture capital model.
You're giving me a distributor presentation, by the way, as we talk to these large, mid, and small wholesalers. I'm like, look, you got to stop saying you're getting rid of your long tail suppliers, because it might work from a national viewpoint, but some of those long tail suppliers in your distributor in South Carolina does really well, that you probably want to keep it in South Carolina, but maybe get rid of it in Illinois, rather than just doing a blanket statement that I'm just going to go all in with the large suppliers and forget about the small guys, getting them their own way. Let me ask a question. So I've been talking about like just there's like qualitative and quantitative data. So when I talk about quantitative data, Professor Sudan,
Yes.
there's things like movement, velocity, what do you call it, ACV? Does that matter? Or is that all this like a bunch of happy like not? I mean, does it matter to the buyer?
Yeah. It matters to a buyer. I think, and there's a good buyer will understand that you're going to have a higher velocity depending on what type of stores you're in. And you're going to have so there's understanding the store clustering is really important. We had 125 stores at Giant Eagle. We broke them into 4 clusters. So we would authorize things in like a waterfall impact. Like you might get authorized first at our higher cluster stores. I'd say velocity is important. Change in velocity is really important. So are you growing or increasing your sales per point of distribution? And I think a lot of times you'll see we're growing. It's like, well, you're in more outlets, but you're actually going back to that mutual fund approach of the shelf. Are you actually being more productive in the outlets that you're in? I think if you have a specialty item, especially at the high end, you want to be very cognizant of where the product is being placed in a retailer's shelf set.
Does a retailer care about opportunity gap analysis? In other words, if I went and looked and say, okay, I'm going to look at myself versus Tito's, that's my benchmark. I'm only in 5 of your stores. Correct me, please. But my VPO per outlet is 10 versus Tito's is 5. But they're in 100 stores and I'm in 5. If you got me in 100 stores, I'd outperform Tito's. Does that resonate? Do they believe that math?
Yeah, I use gap analysis a little more at like the sub-segment level. So I used it this way. One of the things I looked at when red blends were hot, right? So when Apothic was popping, Menage a Trois was popping.
Yeah.
I was saying, all right, what is the percentage of our, $8 and above business that's non-mag, right? So not, back out all your, Barefoot and Sutter Homes of the world. What was our percentage of red blends? And I wanted that to be a higher share of the pie of wine than the rest of the market. Because I was like, red blends are growing. I want to make sure if I have a larger chunk of that growing segment that I'm going to actually have it. And if the reverse was true, if I had a gap where I'm like, oh my gosh, 10% of the market now is red blends and I'm only at 5, I got to figure some stuff out.
So you did category gap analysis.
Category gap analysis.
Okay, got it.
And that would guide my macro decision. Do I need more of a product or less than a product? Because inside of a category, if a brand, it's like, all right, well, there's substitutable factors. And if I'm winning with Tito's and losing with Smirnoff, like, you can how does that work out? But if I'm losing in vodka and vodka's growing and I'm not growing, vodka, the rest. That's a bigger concern. And then it helps drive some segment decisions. So that's where it's important to understand the segment you're performing in and how that is performing at the specific retailer.
So I'm going back to the and I wrote it down. I'm absolutely stealing it. The Europe to US comparison of being in Minnesota and Iowa, like fine, it's easy to think like I'm going to be in 2 states, but you wouldn't be in whatever Ireland and the UK, right? So my question for that, and I've seen this happen in past lives, and it's going to end up happening with some of the brands I'm working with. It's a conversation that the writing's on the wall for, alc or non-alc, right? If a brand came to you, kind of paint the picture here. So say a brand comes to you and you love it, right? Like they've done their homework and they're telling a good story. They seem like good people. They seem like they've got their head on straight financially. All the things. They're checking all the boxes. You're like, guys, this is amazing. I want to bring you into, I'm making up a number, 50 stores, right? And they go, oh my God, that would be so cool. We were thinking more like 5, right? Okay. How do you, obviously from an ops guy perspective, right? Like I applaud them for knowing where their line is and not biting off more than they can chew such that they upset you and take on more than they can comfortably accommodate, right? But from your perspective, what's the best method for them to be able to handle that conversation, if that makes sense, right?
Yes, I just want to make sure I understand. So the manufacturer is telling the buyer, we want to be in less stores than you're thinking, right? Is that
right? So like,
yeah, okay.
So like right now, one of the brands I'm working with, canned cocktail type product, and yeah, I mean, from what they've told me anyway, and again, I'm not involved in these conversations, but from what they've told me, they typically get fairly positive responses. Or like Past Life was a non-out company that, large retailer said, "Hey, we want to bring you into 40 DCs around the country," right? Well, that company ran out of money and laid me off. So hindsight's 2020. They should have said, "Hey, what about two DCs and let's start there," right? So if they're intentionally being a little conservative for the sake of incremental growth and stair stepping their business, which again, in some ways I applaud, but from your perspective, what's the best way to handle that conversation?
I think the first thing you tell the retailers, the last thing we want to do is be out of stock in your stores because that's going to cost you money.
Is it true of the old saying out of
I
stock
think
never
there's,
business, a progressive grocer? I think we learned that at Gallo.
yeah, I
It was
mean,
the
you
Gallo
can't make
sales manual.
you can't make money with empty shelves, right? You need to be on shelf. There's not a quicker way to irritate a buyer than to sell in a program and then not be able to supply it. Because it's like
Totally.
somebody didn't do their homework, somebody wasn't realistic, somebody didn't understand the capabilities and constraints of their manufacturing operations. But I think you would tell the retailers, you just bring them into your world. Look, we first off, we love that, and maybe that's a year 2 or a year 3 goal for us. But I think it's actually, I want us to execute at a high level, keep you in stock. And let's talk about getting into the accounts where we're going to be able to post the biggest wins and where we can support you the best. And then I'll come back to you. And this is where the good reps, this is how you be a great rep. I'll come back to you with some ideas about how we can scale and then very quickly get back and say, look, really appreciate the larger view on this. Here's how we're going to get there. Here's what we're doing over the next 12 to 24 months. But the last thing I want to do is be out of stock because that'll just retailers remember a lot of things. They forget a lot of things, but they always remember the time they got burned on an app. Because then you have that store calling up. I got people at the front end badgering me about where the product is.
I worked on a brand. I'll just
What the
make it
hell are you
nameless,
doing?
and I don't know the brand because I talk about it all the time. But I can tell you is they were in 38 states with Bevmo and Total Wine and More. And every time Bevmo and Total Wine and More would show up to order the product, they didn't have it.
Mhm.
Oh, we got these two flavors, but these will be ready in 4 weeks. You know what happened is they deleted them
So
because they're
here's
like, I got to have a fulfillment rate of 95%. If you can't fulfill it, you can't be in my stores.
so Brian, here's my follow-up to this. I assume I know the answer. I'm asking selfishly because I want to hear you confirm it for me. A lot of brand owners, when I will say things similar to some of the things that you've said, will give me the old adage of like, "Oh, well, we may not get this opportunity again." So if we tell them we're not ready for what they're offering, they might just tell us that they're not interested in working with us. And my assumption, based on what you and other people that I know have told me, is like, yeah, that might happen. Like, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think buyers, whether it's at the distributor level or the retail level, are a lot more willing to hear you be what am I trying to hear you be considerate of how you can deliver at a high level, even if that means it's a smaller footprint, than you as the brand are assuming. Meaning, I don't think you're going to get all right, well, if you can't meet what we want you to, get the hell out. As long as your statement as the brand is, hey, I can't meet 50 stores, but I can meet 5 and I can meet 5 really well. I think people are pretty open to that. Would you agree?
I think so. And I think this is where storytelling is important. Hey, look, before Boston Beer owned a brewery in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, and in Delaware, they were contract brewing.
Pittsburgh,
Right?
Pittsburgh Brewing Company, right? The Pittsburgh.
Yeah, 'cause I think that's part of the story is like, look,
Yeah.
hey, we're new, we're growing, we're scaling this thing, but it's a capital intensive business, and we have every dollar we make, we're going to reinvest back into this business, but we want to be able to supply the market appropriately, and we want to be able to, when we just think about going back to that micro story, right? We want to make sure people in Atlanta can find our product when they need to find it, right? We don't want them to go find another brand. And you have to play the long game on it. Now, it's an interesting conversation to take back to investors or take back to co-packers and say, hey, look, we're getting some nibbles here. We're getting some wholesale retail demand on this thing. Let's figure out how to meet the demand. But I think it always goes back to, we want to make sure you can deliver your shopping customers, your drinkers, a really great shopping experience. And we have plans to grow, we have ambitions to grow, but we want to do it with the right
And
way. We want to
I
do it
have a little
thoughtfully.
brand called Art Rev. I'll call them out. This made Earl Giles, whatever. My two friends, Ann and Jody. But I believe they're building that brand smart, Adam and
Yeah.
Brian. They're not trying to be everywhere. They're just, and they're not playing the price game. They have a story behind their brand, why they created it, and they got 4 Total Wines in Los Angeles, and they're really happy with that.
Yeah.
And we're getting ready to go to Missouri just to try to cover 20 stores because those stores want it. So they're just being very strategic about where they're growing. So, and when they go into a state or a country like Europe, they're not going everywhere in that state. They're like, okay, I'm just going to be in LA and I'm going to be in these 4 Total Wine and More stores, and I'm going to do those really well. And I have they call them ambassadors, or we call them feet on the street, and they're going to go in those stores and make sure they're talking to the consumer.
Again, I'm a kid in a candy store for this whole conversation. Yeah, it just helps validate that I'm not leading, not that I thought I was, but it helps drive the point further home that I'm not leading people astray, even in the general advice that I'm giving, because again, I get asked, right, as the like, hey, you helped us fix our cogs. How should we pitch that to a distributor? I'm like, oh God, guys, I'm not the person for this conversation, but here's some loose knowledge, right? So we're coming up on time. We're not there yet, but Brian, for Sam and I, as we think about, maybe folks to make introductions to, right? Who's your ideal client? Because I'm sure the answer is you could help a bunch of people in a bunch of different ways. But if you can, again, I like to distill things down into very much what do you want to be doing or what do you not want to be doing? Who is your ideal client?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about my ideal client and my ideal situation. And I'll talk about my ideal situation first, right? My ideal situation is when you have an established brand with a good strategy and they need to figure out how to go to market, and they need to figure out how to align what I call the 4 horsemen of planning, which is operations, finance, sales, and marketing. And how do you get the 4 of them together? Now, in startups or mid-sized organizations, they usually don't have teams that wake up every day that are like, hey, my job is to get everybody together. I'm the connective tissue. They don't have that, right? So sometimes you need to bring someone to help build those processes or manage an annual planning process on like a fractional level. Large companies will tend to have a kind of centralized planning function. So I like to also say, like, I pick up where the marketers lead off, right? I'm not going to whether depending how the packaging should look, right? What the naming should be, right? That may not be exactly my sweet spot. But and then inside of that is channel strategy. There's 600,000 places that someone can buy a beer in the United States of America. What makes sense for your brand in its life cycle, in your geography? How do you win in C-stores, club, grocery, on-premise, venues, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So that in terms of companies, I think from a revenue standpoint, it's probably like, under $1 billion. I'd say that kind of sweet spot, and probably more on the kind of 50 to 500 million range, where they have some established revenue. They've captured attention downstream of wholesalers and retailers, and those retailers and wholesalers are expecting them to come up with a really good annual plan. They're looking forward to their annual plans. They see them as a potential growth lever for them as a company. I like to work with companies when they're in those different types of situations. And like I said, I think there's if you talk to business leaders, they'll always tell you is, oh man, we had a great idea, we just didn't execute against it, right? Or we didn't execute. Yeah. And executing is it's every minute counts, and knowing people's roles and responsibilities. I'll tie it into my kind of like personal development. I was a tight end on my football team in college, and what I learned was the ability to go into a room full of stinky, smelly linemen.
You were an Ivy Leaguer, right?
Almost Ivy League. I went to Colgate, which
that's not considered the Ivy League?
I'll let people think it's an Ivy League all day long. Absolutely. But we're right down the road from Cornell, which is in the Ivy League. So,
it's still a good school. And you went to Columbia for your MBA too, right?
I went to BU for
Boston
my
University.
Yeah. But, in private, I wouldn't correct you. I'd let you think I went to an Ivy League school. But because we're on a live podcast, I gotta. But no, I played tight end, so I dealt with linemen who were one cut of meat, right? And they had their way of. And then you had your skill players, and it was like, how do you bring it all together? And and I think mature organizations. When I say mature, I'm talking about people being mature, knowing that my role, right? So Adam, your role is to like make the product on time, taste right, accurately, financial, right? Sales is my job is to go out and convince wholesalers and distributors to support this product. Marketing is, all right, I'm going to make sure we have the P's, all the P's, packaging, product, price, any kind of upper funnel media, lower funnel tactics, ready to go. And how do you bring all that together? And sometimes you need someone that's a little bit like Switzerland in the room who, doesn't have the vested interest, but is trying to guide the organization to an outcome so they can, achieve their business objectives. And I've been on roles like that it's nice when you don't really have a dog in the fight, but you're really focused on the outcome. So I can do that in a smaller couple day session. It could be a longer embedded project. It could be ongoing coaching to somebody from a leadership perspective. But I always find just getting people in a room, sitting down with a finance person and being like, tell me what the sales organization does well and tell me what they don't do well. They usually won't like to say that directly to a salesperson's, face, but they're more than happy to talk about it. And they often have really good suggestions on how to make that relationship flourish and work better.
So would I think of you as like a mediator a little bit too?
Yeah, a professional therapist.
How do people find you?
A cross-functional therapist. Find me on LinkedIn. That's kind of my home for interacting with people, posting my ideas and thoughts. Brian Soudant, Soudant.
Yeah, and we'll put it in the final script when we actually publish the.
Thanks. I have a website too, Soudant Consulting Group, which is currently undergoing some maintenance, so it's offline. But I always tell people, if you want to know how I think, go to LinkedIn. I post daily my thoughts of the day. And by the way, we might have to have another session. We haven't even got a chance to talk about tariffs.
We have 9 minutes to talk about it. We talked about it a little bit about the stock market and the impact on them. You were talking about that last night. Let's just first of all, let's transition that for a few minutes, and I'll give you some closing. We were talking last night on Do Seriousness, and I think you mentioned to me something about why the market's doing and why Trump is doing what he's doing. It's not a political discussion by no means, but I read an article on Rolling Stone. Basically, you were saying something like reset the markets or something, or.
Yeah, this is a very incendiary issue right here. I don't think anybody likes waking up and seeing these, stock market declines. And no matter how the stock market performs, there's always somebody saying it's great or bad or criticism, right? But I do think that international trade policy and international monetary policy is incredibly complex. And if anything out of this, you might have a big chunk of the citizenry, we're getting a crash course in all of this. And how does international trade work? How do tariffs work? History of tariffs. What does that look like? I can't imagine the outcome here is to crash the economy. I think it's implementing some structural change, and it's change and comfort don't come at the same time. And I think we're finding that out. I think as it relates to the industry, it's an ever-changing dynamic situation. And some people are going to be more impacted than others in the industry. Right? Costco's dropping prices. I'm not sure how that's going to relate to alcohol, but the general public in alcohol, they may just, I'm going to move to this product. I'm going to move to that product. I'm going to trade up. I'm going to trade down. I'm still going to get what I need to get, but it's going to be interesting. Anybody that's in the import export business, I mean, they're probably getting a crash course in all this stuff right now, but I think there's a lot of smart economists in the world. There's a lot of stuff written on this. And I just tell everybody there's hundreds, if not thousands of angles to any story, and just see what it says. But I mean, globalist, international trade policy, not something I thought a lot about when I would go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning, and now we're all, getting a crash course.
I'm assuming you're talking about that in your classes that you teach. So you teach over at what university? University of Massachusetts?
Yeah, at the University of Massachusetts. So the University of Massachusetts is the flagship system for the state of Massachusetts. There's 5 campuses. I teach at the Lowell campus, which is the Manning School of Business. Great, really fun opportunity. It was something I got asked to do about 5-6 years ago, and the timing wasn't right. And I had some free time and taught a class on change management, which was fascinating. A class on sales to undergraduates, and I'm teaching a class on strategy right now. We're actually studying. We're studying right now. Rouse pasta sauce and the acquisition by Campbell's, and how they took this commodity aisle of pasta sauce and are now selling $7-8 jars of pasta. Really interesting from a premiumization standpoint strategy, but also Campbell's from a acquisition and diversification strategy. Later on this semester, we're going to be covering off the Beam Suntory merger as a case study.
Cool.
Yeah, we're happy to come on. I did one with a guy from Pepsi. He was teaching a class like you, and they were talking about marketing, and then basically put an assignment on this class where they'd actually come up with a marketing plan for one of the brands I was managing. So we did the whole they did the intake with me. Then at the end, I came back to the class and they presented their plan to me, which was really interesting in terms of what they would suggest we do with the brand. And there was two of us. I was a brand, and another person was a brand. If you ever need Adam and I to come in, we're happy to be your assistant profs.
I would love that. And I think anybody listening or watching is, if there's ever anything you're interested in doing, your local university or local community college, they're always looking for guest speakers, and a cold email into a professor or a department head there introducing yourself. I think they're always looking for how do you bring, what you're teaching in the classroom to the real world, but also the source of ideas that come. I mean, Gen Z, it's amazing what they come up with in their perspective on things. It's that youthful exuberance and the youthful creativity that can come out. And I think just being connected to them for
Did
me
you,
has
Adam?
been.
Did you just miss Gen Z? What are you? What gen are you?
Oh God, I think I'm I'll use the phrase elder millennial because I'm 30. I'll be 36 this summer. So I'm
Okay.
I'm just the tail end of being a millennial.
Gotcha.
You're a pretty hardcore millennial. I'm a proud Gen Xer. It's interesting. You have this like Gen.
I
It's
just
just
made
because
the
of the way
bottom
the
of the
generation.
baby boom. I made the bottom of the baby boomers, so we got representation
Oh,
here.
We
Well,
need,
it's
we need to get a Gen Zer on for a
oh my
future
God.
podcast. But it's interesting. There's like this Gen X Gen Z alliance in a sense, because it's the Gen X's kids are mostly Gen Z, and then you have the base. So there's like it's
Uh-huh.
interesting how these different
Uh-huh.
generations come together.
Uh-huh.
Gen Z's view on alcohol is very different, right, than previous generations. And you read a
You
lot
got
of
to
the
come
negative
back on
things.
the.
I think let's do it. Let's do
You
it.
got to
I
come back
think
on the
maybe I'll make.
podcast.
Yeah, let me
Sorry about
scrounge
that.
up a Gen Zer, and let me scrounge up a Gen Zer, and we'll come back on, and we
Yeah,
can talk
great.
about
Yeah.
the world of
Yeah,
food and
we'll interview the
beverage and
Gen Zer,
culture.
and we talk about you a lot. Yeah. Sorry, I think we're getting a delay
Well,
between
even
each
just
other.
I was say even just the it's something I tell my wife all the time. Obviously, I don't hang out with a lot of 16, 17, 18, 20-year olds these days. But yeah, I mean, even just having somebody on going like from your perspective on the world, what does commerce look like? What does buying things look like? What is I just there's no right or wrong answer. I would just be fascinated to hear what they say, right?
It's interesting, and it's definitely a conversation for another call. But how do how do you explain social media to a buyer, from the lens of Gen Z? And you have to really just get into use cases, and here's how we're going to go about doing that. I gave a presentation last week to UMass around careers in the food and beverage industry, and we talked about how food and beverage trends all emerge on social media now. It's all on
Hmm.
TikTok. So you have to have this operational side of, hey, here's I'm going to go and actually get the product into the store. But you can use social media in a very low cost, local strategy to be effective. But you
Hmm.
have to do some. It's not just likes, right? It's also like,
Totally.
oh, how do you go about and do this?
The
But it's interesting. Punching through. The good news is it's easier than ever to get your message out there. But the bad news is it's easier for anybody and everybody to get their message out there.
Yeah.
So how do you actually punch through to the end shopper for consideration?
Yeah, and again, you're spot on. It's a conversation for another day, but there's a couple of gentlemen that I've spoken to that I met on LinkedIn several years ago that have become friends who will talk about exactly that of like, yeah, okay, likes and celebrities and influencers and all that's fine, but when you think about taking social media, and this is my wife's world because she was in digital marketing for 15 years, but you think about taking social media and the connection between that is totally lost on me, and I'm trying to educate myself, but the connection between that and your marketing and sales funnel, top of funnel, bottom of funnel, how you move people through the funnel, all through your digital media, digital marketing, right? It's Greek to me. It's fascinating, right? But it's wild the amount of, start this, stop that, spend here, don't move, a video, not a video, right? I'm like, I'm confused, right? But again, I think there's, to your point, there's definitely a world to have that conversation and not become the crusty old guy that doesn't understand it, right?
Yeah, I think you have to have a plan and execute against the plan. It's like any other part of your go-to-market strategy. I think
Totally.
for social media, it's do you have the right pillars of content that you want to communicate? How do you evaluate its effectiveness? And stay on target. I mean, the good news is you can zig and zag on social media. The bad news is, gosh, you can get off your message really, 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 really quickly. How do you hyper localize? And then there's different things you can do from a spending standpoint to boost your visibility, boost your exposure. How do you go about creating content? You know, and I think there's a lot of agencies out there that say they can fix your brand, you know, overnight, potentially, right? But there's also just a lot of organic, you know, really good, high quality, you know, creative that can come out of it. Down east, for example, they have a really funny, whimsical Instagram feed that is as much about making you smile as it is about educating you about their product. But it's a distinctive brand asset for them. It's how does your social media strategy actually, you know, reinforce your brand's proposition, your distinctive brand assets, how do you use it to create memory structure around the brand, but also communicate new items and updates. And I would also say that, again, for another, gosh, we're just identifying so many topics to get to. The other thing is the value of first party
the
data.
next podcast for the next 2 months here, but this is good.
Seriously, you're just like, but it's also the value of how you capturing first party data, and that is just. It could be phone numbers for texting. It could be email addresses for emailing, but just ways to, you know, have that one-to-one relationship outside of a social platform. But yeah, we can lots to discuss. But this has been awesome, guys. Thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks now, and just enjoy the vibe you put out there.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining.
Well, first of all, you have the link to get in and join us for sure. So I think we're delayed. I apologize. But I know Adam's was going to talk there a little bit. But why don't you, any closing statements, Brian, and then I'll pass it over to you, Adam, to bring us to a close.
Yeah, I just say that, you know, alcoholic beverages, adult beverages is culture, and culture is always changing. And you have to be understanding about, are you on the growth side of the ledger or the contraction side of the ledger? And there's 20,000 companies that sell alcohol in the United States. So you have to have a plan. You got to hustle. You got to be resilient and, you know, just keep grinding. And I think, you know, generally speaking, people are more willing to help than you realize. And, you know, persistence is key. So I look forward to future conversations. But if anybody wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn, you know where to find me, and would love to talk more about how I can help you win in the market.
Fantastic. I will end with, you know, as the ops guy, it's really easy for me to say, you know, every brand owner or somebody at the brand should deeply understand their numbers and their metrics and their data and all those things. I will add to that, though, which is typically not an ops guy thing. Use all that to tell a better story, right? Have a better conversation, have a better plan. Just tell a good tale. Good story will get a lot done, and I'll end with that.
That's great. Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for everybody for joining us today. We'll actually have the actual podcast shared momentarily following the live session. But thanks everybody for joining us, and have a happy Sunday or Saturday. Sorry, I'm a day ahead of myself. There you go.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, then it just here you go. Here you go. Oh, we lost.